Okay, we'll open the floor to questions. We'll take about 8 to 10 minutes. I guess we're a tiny bit behind schedule. We'll do forum members first, so raise your card. But I'll do moderator first as my prerogative. And I'll ask a question of Tom, which I guess is kind of a two-part question. What is it about Chicago that enabled you to overcome the barriers that most of us have to deal with in trying to get data? You know, my job is to keep people from getting tuberculosis in BC. That's my job. But it takes me sometimes a year to get the data that we are the stewards for. And the second part of the question is, do you get any pushback from the public? People always talk about privacy concerns, yet at the same time they're spraying their data all over Facebook and Twitter and the internet in a variety of ways. Has anybody pushed back against any of the data release?
Good pair of questions. One is that we're unfortunate is that we're responsible for that data. And all the credit goes to Mayor Emanuel, who, when he came into office, created the chief data officer role. Chicago was the first to have a chief data officer role for municipal government. Because for him, a number of things, he was coming from being chief of staff here for President Obama, whose team, who was largely based in Chicago, ran a very sophisticated marketing analysis, basically, for discovering voters and leveraging Facebook data. So he himself comes from a background in his politics where that just played a significant role, and he was also in finance, where, of course, in the finance industry, data is absolutely crucial, and I could imagine, I used to work in finance, I couldn't imagine what that profession would be like without data. So for him, I think it was very logical. And then we had the advantage of maintaining and controlling most of this data for various different administrative functions, and it's just about using that data to do the work that we're doing. When it comes to publishing data, the data that we've published online through the Open Data Portal, not too bad of pushback. And one, we're very responsible for what we are publishing online, and we think through that, what we're doing. We, for instance, publish every single crime in the city of Chicago from 2001 to present, so that's a little over 6 million crimes. But we block reduce that address, and so we don't show exactly where it's at, we show the block where it's happened, which is exactly what happens when you read the newspaper. It says on the 500 block of South State Street, such and such happened. And then we mask the latitude and longitude a little bit so you can't quite tell where it was. And so we're pretty responsible. We'll get pushback. We publish all the salaries, and so sometimes city employees push back against us pretty hard. That's, of all the big data that we have, this is just a good point, of all the big data that we have, or what could be conceived big data, a 33,000 row spreadsheet of all the employee salaries is by far the most popular thing on our data portal, by magnitude of 4. So sometimes it's not about how big it is, it really is about the content. But sometimes we get pushed back, but nothing too bad.
Peter.
Yeah, I also found that really enlightening, Tom, your talk. A few years ago, we did a project in New York, in a county on the outskirts of the city, looking at West Nile, and could not get data on. We knew that they were putting down traps and baits and treating a lot of the storm drains, but we couldn't get data on their mosquito pools. And the reason we were given was it would affect house price in the local area. I mean, I don't know if that's really true, but how do you get around this sort of the public's knee-jerk reaction to, even if you do it block by block, their concern about crime, garbage, rats, West Nile, I mean, those things, when you add them together, should affect house price, surely. I can imagine now on Zillow, the little button to see how many rats are in the neighborhood you want to move into.
You know, it's a good question, and there's certainly cultural differences between those. For us, when it came to releasing the West Nile data, it was, this is important, and this is what we're going to do, and we've not gotten a tremendous amount of pushback around that. And I think there's going to be huge differences between very urban areas such as Chicago, New York City, and outlying suburbs, and the notions around that. There's actually a lot of stories that I could share if I had all afternoon about how sometimes even Chicago suburbs view what we're doing in the city of Chicago around privacy. But we released that West Nile, I didn't talk about the project, but we released that West Nile virus data because there's a platform called Kaggle, which is a kind of a competitive data science arena, and we had about $20,000 first prize to see who could predict where West Nile discoveries would be. So we released the data in part of that. We had a number of entrants into the competition, and we're right now, we took the 3 top winners from that. They received their prize money. but it's a condition of that they had to make their model actually open to the public. So we're taking their statistical models and we're blending them together. And probably next summer, we're going to be using those new statistical models to predict where that's at here.
Jeff.
Yeah, following up on that, I was also wondering if, since you've made the data available to the public, others have spontaneously done things with it that you're aware of other than the sort of the solicitations that you've put out.
Absolutely. Working with that civic community that has spawned up around the open data portal has been huge. And we've been very lucky in Chicago. We have the best civic development community there, where people have popped up to create applications that are pedestrian, such as figuring out where your car was towed to and making that website simpler, because frankly, governments don't design websites very well. And so it's allowed other people to fill that need. A project that we're doing this summer, it's fantastic, is somebody pointed out that we do a poor job of predicting, and by we, this is fully the U.S. federal government and Michigan State's fault, so I'm going to throw those people under the bus. But some years ago, there was a model developed to try to predict E. coli levels in Lake Michigan. The model doesn't do a great job because it says the levels are fine, the levels are fine, the levels are fine, which is 85% correct. It misses the 15% of the time when there is a problem. So some researchers pointed this out, and they spent their time, they spent 7 months saying, you know, we think we can do a better model based on data that we have that's publicly available. And indeed, they have a better statistical model. So this summer, we're piloting a new model where we're going to raise advisories on Chicago's beaches, not based on a model that was developed some time ago. And it's a really tough problem. It took a lot of work. But we're using this new model developed by these citizen scientists, so to speak, to make a decision of whether or not those beaches are open or closed. And that's tremendously impactful. The people who worked on this project are very happy that they're able to make a positive impact on their community that they weren't able to do even 5 years ago.
Lance.
Yeah, mine's a Chicago question too. So the data are available and people download and they use them and things like that. So you track downloads. And so do you do things more than that about recommended citations for data on like reproducibility? If someone downloads this week's data and they give you a crime report and 6 months later someone wants to try a new model comparing it to theirs, they need to go back to the old data. You know, do you have recommendations for that? It's sort of an interesting development that the data itself is a product that changes, and you want to know which version people are using or things like that.
Absolutely. We don't track beyond more than just what websites are particular. In part, it's antithetical to open data, and people would question why we're doing this if we're tracking too much of habits. There's a lot of downside and there's a lot of upside to that, and I think I'm pretty satisfied with just letting people use how they want to. Your version control or version tracking is a really important part, because anywhere from technical errors that we have, we've had errors where we wake up in the morning and the overnight scripts, everything is gone because something went haywire. We'll get those fixed, but for those people who download at point in time, to things that update, such as crimes update continuously, and a number of things update continuously. There's not a great way of doing that yet. There's some people in the tech community who are trying to think about versioning data and doing that better. So I have no particular standards of practice there other than it's becoming as a problem as data is becoming more important.
Any questions from the rest of the audience before we break? Oh, I see a question from Martin.
Just to follow up on Lance's question, and I want to re-emphasize the leadership and pioneering out of the city of Chicago on the use of urban data in municipal sectors for doing everything from transaction processing to optimizing service delivery to trying to spur entrepreneurship through things like civic innovation laboratories. I had the privilege and the opportunity to be able to study municipal data in multiple sectors in 2 of the other largest 10 U.S. cities. And some of the comments that you just made were evident in in those as well. And my reaction to really important questions like what the lineage of the data is, what the provenance is, what the governance has been, what is the quality of the metadata documentation. How processable is the data that's on these systems in terms of if a user goes in, can they actually process it on the platform, or do they have to take it out, download it somewhere, transform it in some kind of a way, use another piece of software to then be able to use the data, data sharing and so forth. Fundamentally, those don't exist, at least in the research that I've done. But as Thomas suggested, we're at the beginning of this, and this is a journey, and in the beginning of the journey, the approach the cities have taken to make data liquid and accessible was a huge, major step. And to see you doing the kinds of things that you're doing is very encouraging, that the pace at which this is going to proceed so that all of those other things can happen and we can get real big, high impact value out of it. It's coming. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolute kind words, and thank you very much. And everything that, of course, Chicago is doing is built on the shoulders of scientists who've made this simple for us to do. I do want to mention just one thing on that, because absolutely my fascination with metadata is growing over a period of time. 2 years ago, City of Chicago and University of Chicago, with support from MacArthur Foundation, worked on a project nicknamed Metalicious, which delicious metadata was the notion behind it. And we launched a data dictionary, datadictionary.cityofchicago.org. And the goal was, could we make a data dictionary that was actually accessible to the public? Yeah, let's go with public. Because we're getting to a point where I get calls from press officers, I get calls from the public, obviously researchers such as yourself, saying, do you guys collect X? That question is a question that happens now every single day. Do you collect building permits? Do you collect this? Do you collect that? Some of it's very far-fetched, some of it's real. And the reason I get called is because my title is a chief data officer, and so I kind of know where this exists. But this kind of tribal wisdom of where data exists does not match the internet era where we're at today, where we're trying to search for where data might exist. And not all data is going to be public for a number of perfectly valid reasons. So we launched a data dictionary. The platform itself is open source. It's called Metalicious. But we're working on second phases of this project based on lessons learned. And one of the biggest problems is keeping metadata up to date, as data certainly has a velocity behind it, and so as new things are collected, things are no longer collected. Keeping that up to date was one of the biggest challenges behind that. So again, thank you very much, and I agree, we're at the beginning. We're not there yet when it comes to metadata.
Okay, so with that, we'll break. I'd suggest we take 10 minutes so that we're not too much behind schedule, and we'll see you back here for the final session of the day at whatever 10 minutes from now is, 3:22. Thank you all.